Bonsoir tout le monde. Au nom du Forum Pepsi et ses locataires, j'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue. Nous sommes très fiers de vous accueillir ce soir. We're very pleased that CGI decided to host its event at the Pepsi Forum this year. Many of you may have followed the year-long anniversary, 100th anniversary of the Montreal Canadiens Hockey Club. And often during those events, it was mentioned that the Forum was first constructed and opened in 1924. Well, that's not quite true. The second iteration of the Forum was opened in 1924. The first one was in 1908. There was a very large open-air facility called the Forum Skating Rink, which was constructed on this city block. It was apparently the largest facility of its kind in the world at the time. It would host over 3,000 skaters on a Sunday afternoon. It was used for many years as a concert venue, a circus venue, as well as a skating rink in the wintertime. It was constructed not dissimilarly to the circus in Rome, wherein the interior of the building was open and the exterior was built around the perimeter of the streets. The Forum was the home to the Montreal Canadiens, but it was not constructed for the Montreal Canadiens. It was constructed for the Montreal Maroons, who were the Anglophone hockey team in Montreal at that time. Remembering that the Canadians are les Canadiens. They were the Francophone team representing the French component of Montreal, the Maroons the English component. And in fact, it was only 2 years later that the Montreal Canadiens moved here from the Mount Royal Arena, which burned down in 1926. And both teams shared this facility until 1938, when the Maroons ceased operation and many of their players moved to the Montreal Canadiens. In fact, at that time, the identification and cultural identification of the two teams were used in marketing. And there was a rivalry between both teams that went beyond simply the game on the ice. In March 24th, 1936, the longest hockey game was played here by the Maroons, and the Detroit team at that time lasted 6 overtime periods. People in the stands were actually reading newspapers, which were published that morning, recounting the play of the earlier portions of the game. 1937, here at center ice, where you're currently seated, the team held a funeral ceremony for what was at the time the greatest hockey player of the era, Howie Morenz. 2 months earlier, he had incurred a very serious injury, broke his leg in 4 places, and through complications died. There were about 9,000 people who attended that event, and over 50,000 people lined the parade, the funeral parade, to the cemetery. The Forum and the Canadiens had a very difficult time during the Great Depression, and in fact this building was almost sold and converted into a streetcar barn. They started to do better in the 1940s, and in fact the building was expanded in 1949 up to about 12,500 seats. And at that time, the Canadiens were in a rebuilding program, and from the late 40s until the end of the 1950s, they were successful in reaching the Stanley Cup final on 10 occasions and won 6 of those playoff finals. Of course, in 1955 was the great Richard riot. Richard had a fight in Boston with the Bruins, a previous game, and had been held down by several linesmen while he was fighting Hal Lako. He hit one of the linesmen to get free, and after the game, Clarence Campbell, who was the commissioner of the league at that time, decided to suspend him for the duration of the season, meaning the entire rest of the playoffs. When Boston came to Montreal, the atmosphere was such that they were unable to finish the game. Montreal forfeited the game, and in the ensuing melee, there was a riot in the streets, and much of Western St. Catherine Street was trashed. As we move into the 60s, this facility, which was not only a hockey rink, but was also an entertainment venue, started to become a much more multi-purpose facility. The Beatles held their first indoor concert in North America here in 1964. The Rolling Stones held their first concerts in North America in 1965, and we came back here in 1966. And as a precursor to their concert in Altamont, California, they also incurred huge problems here, ended up terminating the concert early. There was a riot, and in fact, there was a murder at the St. Catherine Street entrance. And if you search through Rolling Stones memorabilia, you will find no material, no mention of this concert, because they quashed all the material subsequent to that event. 1968, the Canadiens again won another Stanley Cup, May 2nd. May 3rd, they expelled everybody from the building and commenced a major reconstruction, $10 million, wherein they drove 4 very large towers into the perimeter of the building, installed 2 very large bridges across the top of the roof in order to expand the building out to the property line, add another approximately 6,000 seats. They cut out all of the columns, and if you look up to the superstructure, you can still see some of the trusses that date from 1924, but which were cut out partially in that 68 renovation. A few years later, the Forum was one of the hosts for the 1976 Olympics, where you're seated now. Nadia Comaneci scored her perfect 10. Sugar Ray Leonard won the boxing gold medal. And much of the gymnastic events were held here at the Forum. There is a social element to this building as well. Many social and political events have been held here, probably none more important than the Yvette Rally of 1980, which many people don't remember, but those who do know about it considered that event to be the turning point in the referendum and maybe something that saved the Canadian Confederation. Lise Payette, who was a prominent PQ minister, made various disparaging references to Claude Ryan's wife, referring to her and using an analogy in a very old Quebecois story about a young submissive girl called Yvette. 10 days later, 14,000 women filled this building in a pro-federalist no rally that was the turning point for that referendum. In March 11th, 96, the Canadiens played their last game and moved to what was then called the Molson Centre, now called the Bell Centre. The project and the building were actually owned by Trizec, not by the Montreal Canadiens, but in a tripartite deal in 1997, the project was sold to a group headed by a local real estate developer, Canderel. And today you're seated in a 600,000 square foot entertainment center. Remember when the Canadiens were here, there was no basement. This building goes down below the metro level. And building's current traffic is about twice what it was when the Canadiens were here in their best years. I'm going to conclude our remarks there. Hopefully a few of these tidbits were things that were of interest to you, and I'm going to turn the mic back over to Mike again. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.